Once, in a quiet monastery nestled deep in the mountains, a great monk lay on his deathbed. His disciples surrounded him, their eyes filled with tears, waiting to hear the final words of their beloved master. The monk slowly turned his head toward his chosen successor, a young monk who had devoted his life to discipline and meditation. With a weak voice, the old master whispered his last words, "My son, never allow a cat in your life." And with that, he closed his eyes and took his final breath. The crowd was stunned. The disciples were confused. A cat? People expected some profound spiritual wisdom, a divine revelation, but instead the master spoke of a cat? Even the young monk was puzzled. Why would my master say such a thing? He thought. What could a cat possibly mean? After the cremation and the final rituals, the young monk couldn't stop thinking about those strange last words. Day and night the sentence echoed in his mind. Never allow a cat in your life. One day, an old monk from the monastery noticed the young monk lost in thought and approached him gently. "My child," he said, "you seem deeply troubled. What burdens your mind?" The young monk bowed and said, "Before our master passed away, his final words to me were, 'Never allow a cat in your life.' I cannot understand what he meant. What could a cat have to do with spiritual life?" The old monk smiled faintly and said, "Ah, you don't know the story behind those words. There is a long story, one that only those who knew him deeply can tell." And then the old monk began to narrate. Years ago, when our master was young, he renounced his home, his wife, his children, and all worldly attachments to seek truth in solitude. He wandered through forests until he settled near a small village. The villagers, moved by his peace and purity, built him a small cottage made of bamboo and straw. He lived there in silence with only two simple robes, one to wear and one to wash. But one day a small problem appeared. The cottage became infested with rats. They chewed holes in his robes and destroyed what little he had. The monk, disturbed by this, went to the villagers and asked, "What can I do? These rats are ruining my clothes." A villager suggested, "Why not keep a cat? It will chase the rats away." The monk thought it was a good idea, simple and harmless. So they brought him a cat. The cat indeed solved his problem. The rats disappeared. The monk could meditate peacefully again. But soon another problem arose. The cat needed milk. Every day the monk had to go to the village to beg for milk for his cat. Tired of this daily struggle, he asked the villagers for advice again. One villager said, "Master, why don't you keep a cow? That way you'll have enough milk for both yourself and the cat." The monk agreed. It seemed practical. The villagers gave him a beautiful cow. But then came another issue. The cow needed grass. And every day the monk had to go to the village, not for milk this time, but to beg for grass. People started whispering, "A holy monk begging for grass? That doesn't look right." So the villagers came up with yet another idea. "There's a widow in our village," they said. "She has no family and lives alone. She would be honored to serve you. She can take care of the cow and bring grass for it." The monk hesitated for a moment, but then thought, "It's just for service, nothing more." The woman came to live near his cottage. She took care of the cow, grew grass and vegetables, and cooked for the monk. At first everything seemed fine, but slowly things began to change. They spent more time together and working, talking, laughing. The boundaries began to blur. The monk began helping her in her chores. Days turned into months, and before long they fell in love. The woman was young and beautiful. The monk was strong and kind. Eventually she became pregnant, and they had a child together. It was then one day the monk sat quietly outside his hut and realized, "What have I done? I left my family to seek peace, but here I am, back in the same world I once renounced." He whispered to himself, "It all started with just one small thing, the cat." The old monk looked at the young successor and said softly, "That's why, before he died, our master said, 'Never allow a cat in your life.'" He paused and continued, "The cat, my child, was not just an animal. It was a symbol of how the smallest temptation, the tiniest comfort can grow and slowly take control of your life. Once you give your mind a little space to wander, it begins to rule over you, without you even realizing it. In our lives, the same thing happens. We know something is wrong, yet we allow ourselves just once. Just one more lie, just one more cigarette, just one more late night, just one more shortcut. We think we can stop whenever we want. But slowly those small actions take root in our habits. And one day we find ourselves trapped wondering how we reached this point. That's how addictions are born. That's how discipline dies. And that's how greatness fades. Not in one big mistake, but in 1,000 small ones we ignore. So remember, never keep a cat in your life. Because once you do, it will keep growing, taking away your peace, your discipline, and your purpose. Guard your mind like a monk guards his soul. Don't give in to small temptations thinking they don't matter, because everything begins small. A crack in the dam begins as a drop. A fire begins as a spark, and a downfall begins with a choice. Choose discipline over desire. Choose awareness over impulse. And most of all, choose control over comfort. So my friend, if you truly wish to live a life of peace and purpose, remember the lesson of the old monk. Never let the cat of temptation enter your mind, because the moment it does, your world will never be the same again.